So for Math 3, Unit 7, Objective 2, we're still going to be working with circles. And so this is our equation that we're familiar with from Objective 1. And as a review, just a reminder that our center of our circle is the value hk. So we look to see what are we subtracting from x, what are we subtracting from y. And then we look to see what this number value is, and that will help us find our radius, right? So this is our radius. That number would be the number value squared. And so to actually find the radius, we would have to root that number. So our goal, though, is to get it into that descriptive form. So we call it descriptive form, meaning we can just look at the equation and quickly identify the center and the radius. So we're going to start with by completing the square. So the first step we're going to have to do is we're going to have to rearrange the equation. And when we rearrange the equation, we are going to collect all of our x terms, and then we're going to collect all of our y terms. And then if there is a constant, that is going to go to the other side. All right, so our first step is we're going to do that rearranging. So I do have a constant, so I'm going to subtract 1 from both sides so I can get that to the other side. And then when I do that, I'm also going to rearrange my terms. So I'm going to gather anything that has an x in it. So that would be the x squared and the 10x. So that's going to go together. And then I'm going to have to figure out what do I add to that to complete the square. So I'm going to insert a blank. And then I'm going to gather all of my y terms. So I have a y squared and I have a 2y. And then I want to insert that blank, right? So I want to insert a blank. And then equal, so my constant, so that gave me 0, and then 0 minus 1 is negative 1. So I'm going to be adding 2 numbers to the left, and I can't do that unless I also add 2 numbers to the right, yes? So I'm going to have to figure out what number goes here, so whatever that is, I also have to add to this side. And then I'm going to figure out what number goes there, and whatever that is, I'm going to have to add over here, right? So whatever I add to one side, I also have to add to the other. So let me get rid of those extra lines that I put in. So to figure out what number goes in here, I want to always take half of this number and times it by itself. So I'm going to take half of that 10, which is 5, and then I want to square it. So I'm going to do 5 and then multiply it by itself. So I'll do 5 times 5 because I'm going to need 2 of them to factor. And so that will give me a 25. And then I added 25 to the left, so I'm also going to have to add 25 to the right. Okay, so I have to do that for the y term as well. Okay, so I'm going to take that y term right here, so I'm going to take that number in front of the linear term, so that 2. I'm going to take half of that, so half of 2. So half of 2 is just 1. And I'm going to times it by itself, so 1 times 1, which is 1. So if I add 1 to the left, I have to add 1 to the right. And I want to do that again because I need to complete the square. So I have to complete the square. All right, so now just to make sure we have that. So when I'm looking for that constant, right, when I'm looking for that constant that I want to use to complete the square, I'm taking half of the linear term, and so we usually use b for that value. And then I want to times it by itself, meaning I want to square it. Okay. So now once I do that, now I'm just looking to factor. So on the factoring side of things, we're just trying to complete the square, right? So just good old-fashioned factoring. So I'm going to go ahead and group this. So I know for x squared, that would be x times x. And then I want to figure out what's going to multiply to 25 and add up to negative 10. So 5 times 5 gives me the 25. And then it has to be negative, so it'll be a double negative. And these numbers should always be exactly the same. That's the whole point of completing the square. So I should never have like a 3 and a 4 or a 1 and a 2. It should always be exactly the same. And then now I'm going to go ahead and factor this group right here. I'm going to do the same thing, so group it out. So y squared is y times y. And then what numbers multiply to 1 and will also add up to negative 2? And that would just be 1 times 1. And then it has to both be negative to get that negative 2. And then now add these 3 numbers together. So negative 1 plus 1 will be 0. So that will just give me 25. And then we're almost done. So we have 2 of exactly the same. So we want to write it out as x minus 5 quantity squared, and then y minus 1 quantity squared, and then equal to 25. Okay, so now we have done that step. So we have completed the square. And so then now our last piece is we want to identify the center and the radius, and then we will do a sketch. So for my center, so now this is exactly like what you just did in objective 1. So my center, I look here at the x, and that will be positive 5, right? So we want to do opposite. 5 minus 5 is 0. And then on this here, we look at the y term, so that would be 1. So 1 minus 1, right? So opposite. And then for my radius, I know this number here is the radius squared, so I want to square root it. So square root of 25 is 5. So now that I have my center and my radius, I can go ahead and graph it. So I'm going to go, my center is 5, so over 5, and up 1. And then I have a radius of 5, so then I'm going to just do the compass coordinate, so to speak. So I'm going to go up 5, so there's the north, and then I'm going to go down 5. There's my south, and then I'm going to go left 5 and right 5. So I'm going to be a little off my paper, and then as best as I possibly can, I'm going to make it look circular, at least. Even if it doesn't look like a circle, it will look circular. Okay, so let's go ahead and do the next one. All right, so we have to rearrange. So I know for sure I'm gonna, let's get all of my x's and my y's on one side and my 17 on the opposite side. So I'm gonna subtract 17. And then I know I'm gonna have to subtract the 6x and add the 8y because I want them over to the other side. So I'm gonna do lots of adding and lots of subtracting. But in general, the 6x and the 8y head over to the squared terms, and the 17 head over by itself. So then making sure that we group things, right? So the x squared will group together. My y terms will group together and leave a constant blank, right? So we'll have x squared minus 6x plus a blank. So there's the x squared and the 6x. And then now we're going to have the y squared and the 8y. We'll have to add some number to complete the square. That all turns into 0. And then we have it equal to negative 17. And then keep it in mind that I'm going to have to end up adding 2 numbers to the left, so I also have to add them to the right. So I'm going to start with a negative 6, and I'm going to take half of negative 6, so half of negative 6 is negative 3, and then I'm going to multiply it by itself, right? So negative 3 times negative 3, that would be 9. I added 9 to the left. I also have to add 9 to the right. And then now let's go on to the next one. So now I'm going to take a look at the 8 to figure out what goes there. So I'm going to take half of 8. So half of 8 is 4. And then times that by itself, right? So 4 times 4, so that would give me 16. And then I'm going to add 16 here, right? And so keep in mind, like these numbers that I'm coming up with, when I take half of that number times it by itself, those always come into play when I do my factoring. So now when I factor this group right here, and I'm asking myself, all right, so x squared is x times x. So when I'm thinking of, well, what 2 numbers go here, it's always going to be these 2 numbers. That's why we created them. So it would be negative 3 and negative 3. Because when I do negative 3 times itself, that gives me 9. And then when I add the negative 3x to itself, that gives me the negative 6x. So plus, so there should have been plus here. So same thing here. So break up the y squared, so that would be y and y. And so what 2 numbers did I use to get 16? Well, I used the 4 and the 4. So that will give me plus 4 plus 4. And again, that's because 4 times 4 is 16, and then 4y plus 4y gives me the 8y. Okay? All right, and then equals, so let's add all of this up. So I'm going to do negative 17 plus 9 plus 16, which is 8. And then instead of writing it as x minus 3 times itself, I'm going to write it as x minus 3 quantity squared, and then plus y plus 4 quantity squared, and then equals 8. Okay. All right, so then now we need to find the center and the radius. So for my center, I've got, look here for my x term, so that would be positive 3. So I want to make sure I do opposite, and then negative 4. So opposite of positive 4. And then my radius, so according to the formula, that's the radius squared. So then I'm just going to take the square root of 8. And so I don't know exactly what that is, right? So I know it's smaller than the square root of 9. So then I know it's going to be less than 3, right? So 2 point something, but close to 3, right? So 2 point something. So when I go and do my graphing, I'm just going to be a little bigger than 2. Okay, so let's get the center graph. So we're going to go over 3. So I'm just counting over 3, and then I'm going to count down 4. There's my center, and then I'm going to hit all my compass points, northeast, southwest, and I'm going to go a little more than 2. So I'm going to go 1, 2, so somewhere there. 1, 2, head to the east. 1, 2, head to the south. 1, 2, head to the west, and then connect the 4 compass points, and as best as you can, make it look like a circle. Okay? All right, so let's do another one here. So I'm going to give myself a little wiggle line. So this one's pretty nice because I don't have to complete the square for both of them. I just have to complete the square for the x terms. So I'm going to have x squared and then group it with that 12x. And then let's put a little blank there. Y squared doesn't have another term with it. No constant to subtract over. I'm only going to add one number to both sides. Fabulous, right? We should have done this one first because it's so much easier. Okay, so what are we going to do first? We are going to take that 12, right? And we're going to take half of 12, so half of 12, which is 6, and then times it by itself. So that gives me 36. So that's what I'm going to add to both sides, right? And so hopefully you're catching on that that's the numbers that are going to show up in my factors, right? So I will have x squared breaks up to x and x, and then it's positive 6 and positive 6. And then I just have that y squared, and then 0 plus 36 is 36. And then x plus 6 times itself, so is the same as x plus 6 squared, and then plus y squared is equal to 36. Okay, so now for my center, it will be negative 6, opposite, nothing being added or subtracted to the y term, so that would just be 0. And then for my radius, I'm going to take that 36 and I'm going to take the square root of that, which would give me 6. And then let's go ahead and graph this one. So my center is negative 6, 0, so I'm going to go left 6, up 0, and then I'm going to hit my compass point. So I'm going to go up 6, oops, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then I'm going to go right 6 and down 6 and left 6 and make my beautiful circle. Okay, all right, so we're going to do a couple of the inequality ones here as well. So for question number 4, so again, we're just doing that rearranging. So I'm going to have to add 12 over though, because that's my constant. X squared has nothing to group with, which is perfect, right? Because that just makes it a little bit easier to do. And I have to add a constant to my y terms. That gives me 0. And so I'm going to add one number to the left, so I'm going to have to add one number to the right. So I'm going to take half of negative 4, which is negative 2, and then times it by itself. That gives me positive 4. So then I'm going to add 4 to both sides so I can complete the square. So x squared has nothing to factor with, so it's just the y terms I'm going to be factoring. So I know y squared is y times y. And then have we caught on? These are the two numbers that I'm going to use to go here, and that's because negative 2 times itself is 4. And then negative 2y and negative 2y give me the negative 4y. So 12 plus 4 is 16, and then I'll write that as a quantity squared, so y minus 2 quantity squared. And then my center, so for my x term, I'm not adding or subtracting anything to x, so that would give me 0. And then for my y term, I'm going to do the opposite of that, so it'll be positive 2. And then for the radius, I'm going to take the square root of 16. So now this one I have an inequality, right? So when I have that inequality, less than or equal, I want to look, do I use a solid line or a dotted line? I'm going to use a solid line, right? Because it is equal to each other. So when I go to graph it, I need to make sure I do a solid line. Okay, so let's graph that. So we're going to go over 0 up 2, and then I'm going to go 4 units in each of the compass directions. I'm going to do a solid line to connect. And I know that I want to shade in this section. So this is less than or equal, right? So I have to be smaller, right? So I have to be smaller than my radius. And so I'm going to shade inside, right? So if I see this symbol, that means less, right? So smaller. So I would shade in the inside. Okay, last one here. So we're going to go ahead and do the rearranging. So I'm going to put those x terms together. And then I'm going to put my y terms together. And I'm also going to add the constant to the other side. And then I'm going to insert a value there to complete the square because I have 2 terms. So I need to create that third. And then y squared plus 8y. So I have 2 terms. So I'm going to need a third to complete the square. And then 0 plus 1 just gives me 1. I'm going to eventually add 2 numbers to the left and to the right. And so then let's go ahead and complete the square. So I'm going to first start with the negative 2. So half of negative 2 is negative 1. And then we're going to times that by itself. So that would give me a positive 1. And then keep in mind that I'm going to end up using those 2 numbers to do my factoring, right? And then let's take the 8. So we'll do half of 8, which is 4, and then times 4 by itself. So 4 times 4, which gives me 16. So I'm going to add 16. And then I need to go back and add that 1 to the right-hand side and also add the 16, right? Whatever I add to one side, I need to add to the other. Okay, so when I factor that, so when we factor this, so to get x squared, I'm going to need x and an x. And then to get that positive 1, I'm going to use negative 1 and negative 1, so I also can get the negative 2. Do the same thing for the y side, so y times y. And then what multiplies to 16 and adds to 8 is 4 and 4. And then add these 2 numbers up, so that would give me 16, 17, 18, so 18. And then that will be x minus 1 quantity squared, and then y plus 4 quantity squared is equal to 18. So then my center is going to be positive 1, negative 4, right? So the opposite and the opposite. And then my radius is going to be the square root of 18. So again, I don't know exactly what that is, but I know that the square root of 16 is 4. So I know it's going to be a little bigger than 4 since 18 is a little bit bigger, right? So 4 point-ish. Okay, so I do have an inequality here, right? So I'm going to be greater than. So that means when I graph it, because it's strictly greater than and not equal, I need to make sure I use a dotted line, right? So it can't have solutions on the border. It's got to be, not including that. So let's get the center. So we're going to go over 1 and then down 4. Let me scoot this up just a little bit. Over 1, down 4. And then my radius is going to be a little bigger than 4. So I'm going to go a little bigger than 4 all the way around, roughly on the downward side. And then I'm going to use a dotted line, right? A dotted line to graph. And then which way was the inequality? Because I wrote equals all the way down, and I should have had greater thans here. So that should be greater than. So greater than meaning I want to be beyond or bigger than my radius. So beyond my radius, bigger than my radius. So that's everything outside of that dotted line. And there we go. And then we're not going to do the equations down here. because we have done lots of those practices. And these have like odd numbers in them, but we are just going to be focusing on just those even number values. And that's it.